Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Welcome to Handmade History.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And today we are very excited because we're talking about zines. Sonia, do you have any experience with zines?
I don't think I ever really made zines. I remember you talking about them a lot.
I did.
But I do remember making the little booklets. So I definitely, where you cut it, you can make a little booklet out of a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely remember doing that. So
that's fun.
Thing. Yeah.
Yes, I made a zine. I was about 10 years too late for the Riot girls, but I really wanted to be them. So that means, Sonia, you were about 20 years too late for the Riot girls. So why don't we get started? Sonia, want to kick us off?
Yes. So what is a zine? A zine comes from the word magazine, and it is a self-published and most often photocopied little booklet. It's usually small. Two common sizes are one sheet of copy paper folded into eighths or several sheets folded in half and stapled together, book style. So the copy paper folded into eighths, that's what I know.
You make two little cuts.
Yeah, and you can fold it into a little book. That's
cool.
What I remember.
Very fun.
Yeah. So it can cover personal topics, which are called perzines, fiction, music, and other fandoms, or how-to. By nature, they are outside of mainstream media, and they can be made by individuals or collaboratively. This means that there are no gatekeepers and no barriers to creating a zine. Anyone can make one. You could make one right now if you wanted to.
Yes.
Jenna Friedman, director of Barnard's Zine Library, quotes Jen Angel and Jason Kuksa, publishers of the Zine Yearbook. Quote, "You don't need any specialized equipment to broadcast over the airwaves or record your ideas, and you don't even need a computer to create or view zines. All you need is a pen, paper, and a couple of dollars for the copy machine. Because there are no economic barriers to creating zines, they far bridge the digital divide, the gap between those who have access and how much access, and those who do not, as a grassroots and decentralized form of media. You're getting the voices of anyone with the gumption to put their words on paper, not simply those who have access to a computer."
Yes. And zines have their roots in several traditions that we will talk about, including amateur press, little magazines, sci-fi and fantasy fanzines, and the punk movement, specifically Riot Girls. So we'll start with amateur press. So the amateur press movement was loosely organized groups of mostly men in the 1870s who got together and published their own works. And one of their first meetings was held in Philadelphia in 1876 in anticipation of the centennial celebration of the United States. So this was loosely in connection with the fair that was going on there. It was kind of an excuse for people to travel and meet up. And so the folks who were interested in amateur press said we should have a meeting since this fair is going on here. And national organizations for amateur press are still around today. And from the National Amateur Press Association, Edna Hyde MacDonald wrote in their history that the organizers were, quote, "just a lot of dubs who'd like to putter around with pen and ink and type, putting ideas on paper, printing the same, exchanging random thoughts with other dubs, and annually getting around to knowing a few of each other. No harm in it, just for the fun." So there's no emphasis on literary merit. It's not a literary... These are not literary publications. They're fun. Some of them are fiction. They have all different kinds of genres, and people print them themselves or copy them. Some people have other people print them for them. So it's very loosely organized. And today, members can send in their publication to the National Amateur Press Association and receive a monthly mailing of everyone's publications, which sounds really fun to me.
Yeah, that's cool. So next we'll talk about little magazines, which was a literary movement that sprung up in the early 1900s. It was in several places, but most notably in Harlem. And a lot of the following comes from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a Smithsonian institution. The Harlem Renaissance was a cultural moment that happened in Harlem, which was home to the, quote, greatest concentration of Black people in the country. Roughly 175,000 Black people lived in the 3 square miles, and many had moved to the area as part of the Great Migration. which was a huge exodus of African American people from the South as they faced the realities of Reconstructionism and crushing white supremacy. Many moved to cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, LA, and New York City. In Harlem, there was a wide diversity in terms of class. However, this is a quote, they shared common experiences of slavery, emancipation, and racial oppression, as well as a determination to forge a new identity as free people. So this led to a flourishing of the arts: poetry, prose, painting, sculpture, jazz, swing, opera, and dance. Alain Locke, a well-known scholar known as the, quote, dean of the Harlem Renaissance, called it a spiritual coming of age. And it peaked in the 1920s and came to a close with the stock market crash. Some famous names you might know from this time are Josephine Baker, Zora Neale Hurston, and W.E.B. Du Bois. And there was many other writers, dancers, scholars, and artists.
So within this movement, the Harlem Renaissance, little magazines were published. And these often were literary, but they could include art, illustrations, and other non-writing expressions of art, along with poetry and prose. And one significant publication I came across was called Fire, with an exclamation point. And I just want to note ahead of time that at this time, the word Negro was a polite word used to refer to Black folks, so we will use it here in our quotes. Our goal is to be respectful. So Fire was founded by Richard Bruce Nugent. He was a friend of Langston Hughes, who suggested the idea to him. And Hughes said that he should start a magazine by, quote, by, for, and about the Negro to show what we could do. The title for the magazine came from a spiritual that Hughes wrote and Hall Johnson composed called Fire. It was first published in November of 1926. It included writing by Wallace Thurman, Zora Neale Hurston, Gwendolyn Bennett, and of course Langston Hughes, and art by Aaron Douglas. And from the foreword, there was this poem: Fire, flaming, burning, searing, and penetrating far beneath the items of the flesh to boil the sluggish blood. Fire, a cry of conquest in the night, warning those who sleep and revitalizing those who linger in the quiet places dozing. Fire, melting steel and iron bars, poking livid tongues between stone apertures, and burning wooden opposition with a cackling chuckle of contempt. Fire, weaving vivid, hot designs upon an even-bordered loom, and satisfying thirst for beauty unadorned. The flesh is sweet and real, the soul an inward flush of fire. Beauty, flesh on fire in the furnace of life blazing. So that was the introduction to the publication. And this magazine was offered for sale for $1, which is about $18 in today's dollars, and it was intended to be a quarterly publication.
And it was not a money-making publication. It was meant to be a publication to showcase the work of Black writers and artists. The board of directors wrote this. Quote, being a non-commercial product interested only in the arts, it is necessary that we make some appeal for aid from interested friends. For the second issue of Fire, we would appreciate having 50 people subscribe $10 each and 50 more to subscribe $5 each. We make no eloquent or rhetorical plea. Fire speaks for itself. So other individuals and groups work together to make their own little magazines to share their work. And here you can see some of the characteristics of zines we mentioned earlier. They were outside the mainstream. At this time, Jim Crow laws were in effect. And even in the less overtly racist North, Black people were still treated as second-class citizens, and publishing houses were dominated by white men. They were collaborative. Several of the contributors were also on the board of directors, and they were self-published and not-for-profit. And you can still read Fire online, and we have a link in our show notes.
So now we'll move on and talk about pulp magazines and sci-fi zines. At the same time the Harlem Renaissance was going on, pulp magazines were very popular. These were magazines full of fiction stories, and they were what we would call genre today. They could be soapy or dramatic and over the top. And Amazing Stories was a pulp magazine that was unique and influenced several future zine makers. It was published in New York City. Its first issue came out on April Fool's Day, 1926. And in the intro, the editor writes, quote, another fiction magazine. At first thought, it does seem impossible that there could be room for another fiction magazine in this country. He then goes on to promise, quote, scientific fiction, or what we today would call science fiction or sci-fi. And Amazing Stories included stories by H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and Edgar Allan Poe, and it inspired some of the first fanzines. So fanzines can be about any fandom at all, music, books, art, anything, but the first fanzines were actually about sci-fi.
There were several sci-fi fanzines that emerged around the same time, and likely many more that weren't saved because they were very, very small print runs. Sometimes as small as 10 copies were made. So in 1930, The Comet was published. And The Comet was a publication of the Science Correspondence Club. It was created by Raymond A. Palmer and Walter Dennis. They write in their introduction, quote, Mr. Sidney Gerson and Mr. Walter D. Dennis conceived the idea of a club whose central idea was to spread science and scientific thought among the laymen of the world so inclined, by means of correspondence. Upon further thought, they decided to specialize on the idea of using correspondence as a means of drawing interested parties in the same localities together to form local groups who could discuss their own problems and ideas together. This is the idea of the Science Correspondence Club, as first originated, closely followed the plan of the United States government. So they mentioned Amazing Stories as their inspiration for the zine, and they requested $3 a year as dues, which is about $57 in today's dollars. And their business office was in Milwaukee. In their first issue, they offered a preview of the types of articles you might read, an article called Trends in Psychology by Lilith Lorraine. And they also invited readers to submit short stories.
Yes. So according to the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, the first use of the word zine appeared in 1946. It appeared in a fanzine called Startling Stories. Startling Stories included a column called Review of the Science Fiction Fan Publications, written by a Sergeant Saturn. And Sergeant Saturn wrote, meanwhile, according to a new card zine entitled Mercury, Doris Courier, the well-known Wonder Witch of Salem, Mass, not Oregon, is reputed to be planning another fanzine as well as another convention of fans. The zine will be welcomed, at least by ye Sarge, since the list up for review this issue is about at low water. So I thought it was very exciting to read the very first instance of the word zine, and that I referred to a woman named Doris Courier, who was a witch in Salem.
Yeah.
Thought that was awesome.
That's pretty cool.
So yeah, Doris Courier's publication was known as the very first zine.
Wow.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. So zines have been part of communities outside of mainstream culture from the very beginning, as we've been talking about. And at this time, sci-fi was definitely outside of the mainstream. Queer communities were another place where people made zines. And one of the earliest non-sci-fi zines was called Vice Versa, and it was a queer zine by Lisa Benn. And a lot of the following comes from the research of J.D. Doyle, including scans of the original zines, which I was able to read, which is pretty cool. And Vice Versa by Lisa Benn was probably the U.S.'s first queer magazine. And it was, of course, a zine.
Mm-hmm. In Vice Versa issue number 1, Lisa Benn writes, have you ever stopped to enumerate the many different publications to be found on the average newsstands? There are publications for a variety of races and creeds. A wide selection of fiction is available. For those who prefer fact to fiction, a variety of publications on politics, world affairs, economics, and sports are available, and newsstands fairly grown with the weight of hobby and miscellaneous publications. Yet there is one kind of publication which would, I'm sure, have a great appeal to a definite group. Such a publication has never appeared on the stands. Newsstands carrying the crudest kinds of magazines or pictorial pamphlets appealing to the vulgar would find themselves severely censured were they to display this other type of publication. Why? Because society decrees it thus. Hence the appearance of Vice Versa, a magazine dedicated, in all seriousness, to those of us who will never quite be able to adapt ourselves to the iron-bound rules of convention. The circulation of this publication, under the circumstances, must be very limited, going only to those who, it is felt, will genuinely enjoy such a magazine.
Lisa Benn was a pseudonym. It's actually an anagram of lesbian, but the author of Vice Versa is anonymous. And the writer's real name was Edith Ide, and she began using the name Lisa Benn later when she contributed to magazines. Edith Ide began as a fantasy fan and contributed to sci-fi and fantasy zines first, writing under the name Tigrina. She wrote an essay for Voices of the Imagination, VOM, V-O-M, called Why I Prefer Weird Fantasy, and she shared a bit of her biography in it. Ide grew up on a ranch in Northern California, and she was an only child. She had a lot of imaginary friends. She read Weird Tales magazine at a neighbor's house when she was 6 or 7, a pulp magazine that had fantasy and horror fiction in it that is still around today. And she said the genre, quote, fit right in with the imaginative little world I had created for myself. Her parents disapproved of her fascination with fantasy, and she was bullied at school. She was the smallest and the youngest kid in her class, and she became interested in black magic and witchcraft. When she got older, she wrote, quote, "I embraced fantasy as a means of escape. The nearest theater to her was 4 miles away, but she would make lists of movies that she wanted to see, even though she would never see them." And as an adult, she wrote, "Now my interest in fantasy is unhindered, and I have unlimited access to different types of fantasy books and magazines." I went to college, but then moved to LA and worked as a secretary. And this is when she created Vice Versa magazine on a typewriter and used carbon paper to type copies. She made only 10 copies of each issue, and they were passed hand to hand. There's no address on any of the issues, though she encourages people to contribute. And she created 9 editions of Vice Versa from June 1947 to February 1948. Today, there's an award in her name called the Lisa Ben Award for Achievement in Features Coverage, given by the Association of LGBTQ+ journalists. And she went on to contribute to the latter. And she was also a musician and recorded several gay parodies of songs.
Good segue, because the next phase of zines was intricately connected to music. So the photocopier was invented in the 1970s, and this made copying zines much easier. Zines were made by all kinds of people, including punks in the punk movement. According to Elizabeth Farmington, a researcher, quote, "Punk is the rejection of societal standards and a liberating rebellion of oneself. Punk music isn't very melodic, and a lot of the singers yell. And zines were a good fit because they are DIY, and punks are by definition anti-establishment. So zines are kind of the only media they wanted to participate in because they are, by definition, outside of the mainstream."
Yes, and out of that emerged the Riot Grrrls. So zines became super popular and more visible in mainstream media and culture in the 90s. As we mentioned above, I was tragically about 10 years too late to be a part of this movement. As a teenager, when I was making my zine, Bikini Kill had already broken up several years earlier. So
sorry.
Thank you. I watched a really great documentary called The Punk Singer, directed by Cini Anderson, that was about Kathleen Hanna, who started the punk band Bikini Kill. And it was a great resource for this research. And that researcher we mentioned above, Elizabeth Farmington, wrote that fanzines were essential to the formation of Riot Grrrl. So let's start by talking about third wave feminism and Riot Grrrl. Riot Grrrl was a movement that emphasized women taking back power. It was part of third wave feminism, and it emerged kind of in opposition to the punk movement that you were talking about, Sonia. So we gave a definition of third wave feminism in our episode about knitting groups that focused on choice and an embrace of domestic activities, but we need to expand it here. The term was actually coined by Rebecca Walker, the daughter of Alice Walker, who is a writer and the first African-American woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. Rebecca Walker wrote a book called Becoming the Third Wave. And third wave feminism was also about reviving feminism as a movement because women were perceived as being apathetic about activism. But at the same time, we still had a lot less power and we suffered much more violence than men. When Kathleen Hanna went to Evergreen College in Olympia, Washington, she shared a copy of an article from Time magazine that asked, "Is feminism dead?" And she and her friends, like artist Tammy Ray Garland, were really upset by this. Garland says, "We were doing it and thinking it and feeling it." In other words, they experienced sexism every day. Hannah was a photography major, and she made feminist collage art. And she said, "When we would bring in our work, we were treated like we were crazy." And while Hannah was a freshman, her roommate was assaulted in their home. So these examples were specific to one person and group in one place, but Hannah shared her stories through her band Bikini Kill and through the Bikini Kill zine, and they found that these experiences were widespread, and this is part of what led to the Riot Grrrl movement.
Riot Grrrl filtered feminism through a punk rock lens. It emphasized women acting out, being loud, and saying or screaming about their own personal experiences. This included bringing to light stories of sexual abuse, incest, and rape. It was also about reclaiming girlhood and associating girlhood with power instead of meekness and submission. It was a community movement that included concerts and group meetings. And Riot Grrrls largely shared their stories and messages through zines.
Kathleen Hanna started Bikini Kill with Toby Vale and a few other people. And Toby had a very cool zine called Jigsaw that included a lot about punk music. And she coined the term angry girl with 3 R's. Toby said, By this time, I'd been going to shows, playing in bands, and doing a radio show for 5 or 6 years, but was lacking a feminist community. I was afraid to articulate this because I anticipated a backlash. This anticipation manifested itself in my body. At times, I found it physically impossible to speak. Like many teenage girls, I felt powerless and out of control. Making a zine helped me overcome this situation. After a mass shooting at the University of Montreal where the shooter said, "I want women," Jen Smith of the punk band Bratmobile said, "We need a girl riot." And Molly Newman, Jen Smith, Kathleen Hanna, Allison Wolfe, and Toby Hill, members of Bratmobile and Bikini Kill, created the first Riot Girl zine, a free weekly mini-zine. They also started Riot Girl meetings, which were unstructured and allowed women to come together and share their stories.
So some fun facts about the movement. Kathleen Hanna spray painted "Smells Like Teen Spirit" on a wall with Kurt Cobain. "Smells Like Teen Spirit" would go on to become the breakout album from Kurt Cobain's band, Nirvana. And Kathleen Hanna made a solo album called Julie Ruin, and one of the songs on it is called Crochet.
Yeah, a little tie back to crafts.
Yeah, all connected. Eventually, members of Bratmobile and Bikini Kill moved to D.C., and the Riot Girl movement spread there. Later, Kathleen Hanna moved to New York City and started Le Tigre with Johanna Fateman after reading one of her zines. It was a decentralized movement, meaning anyone could take it and make it their own. Other Riot Girl bands included Veruca Salt, Slater Kinney, and Hole. Black women and girls started Sista Girl Riots, which were Black female-led punk bands. And Ramdasha Biksim, a Black woman from Olympia, started Gunk Zine. Biksim said, quote, "This sounds kind of snotty, but I see Riot Girl growing very close to a very chosen few, i.e. white middle-class punk girls. It's like some secret society, but then again, there are some who feel that a secret society is what we need." And Riot Girl petered out when the bands broke up in the late 90s, but by then, zines had entered the mainstream consciousness.
Yes. And now we'll talk about zines from kind of that period until today. So there are numerous distros, which are distributors of zines, and zinefests around the country. There are also several zine libraries, like ABC No Rio, which is a nonprofit in New York City, and there are collections at several universities, like Barnard. And I bought a great book called Stolen Sharpie Revolution, a DIY resource for zines and zine culture by Alex Reck. Alex Reck has been making the zine Brain Scan since 1997. Reck runs the Portland Buttonworks and Zine Distro and also started International Zine Month, which is in July.
Reck has thought a lot and spoken a lot about zines and zine culture in its most recent incarnation. Here are some quotes from her. "People who think zines are dead either walked away from zines years ago or don't know where to look. It waxes and it wanes and it comes with new faces. For a long time, there were all these zines are dead articles. Now there's the zines are back and thriving articles. And I just think, where were you? I've been here making zines and going to zine events and watching there be more zine events and more archiving and academic research involving zines. Just because some people walked away from zines and zine culture doesn't mean that the rest of us stopped, you know? A lot of it is just your perspective and what is available to you. I totally acknowledge that there are infinite paths to get to zines and ways to create them. I'd hate to be held as an ultimate authority when I know my own faults. Just make a zine that you are proud of right now and don't be afraid that you might not be proud of it next week." I like that.
I like it too. I think it's a good motto for life and work.
Yeah.
I thought I would talk about the zine that I made in high school because it was really fun. It was called Wanted, and I wrote under the pen name The Mermaid. But they gave it out at my high school. Everyone knew it was me. And I read about zines in Girls' Life, which was a glossy magazine. So this is what, looking back now, I realize like zines really had entered the mainstream because zines were written about in magazines. So I remember when I read this column that there was like a semi-famous zinester whose zine had gone really popular and like celebrities liked to read it. And she called herself an editrix instead of an editress or an editor. I thought that was really cool. I could not dig this person up though, unfortunately. When I made my zine, I sent it to a distro who paid me in other zines and dollars, and you would mail hidden cash. And I also brought a few copies to ABC No Rio, which is the zine library that is in the Bowery in New York. And our dad brought me, which was pretty cool. My zines were all free, and they touched on subjects of feminism mostly. I had a cutout Shrine to Frida Kahlo and a review of Joe's Boys by Louise May Alcott. And I also very remember reading blog posts on how to use Xerox machines and how to steal the key from Staples to get extra copies. I remember like reading a blog post that was like how to copy your zine, and then it was like all ways to steal copies. So
That track.
yeah, it was. Sonia, you said you've made the little mini zines. Did you make them like in school?
Yeah, I feel like that's where I learned how to do it. I don't think it was like a class. I feel like it was just something everyone was doing in middle school, like making those little books. I never had like you had like an actual like published zine. I never did that, but it was
Published
fun to make.
because I published it. You could have a published zine, Sonia.
Yeah,
You just need.
but I did not. What was your favorite zine to look into? I mean, obviously the Riot Grrrls. You're a big fan.
I mean, like while I was doing this research, it was really cool when I looked up the first mention of the word zine. It just was like, I was like, here it is. Here's the word. As it's being born, I could like just see it. That was awesome. I also kind of got chills looking at the Lisa Ben magazine or zine because she only made 10 copies and she really like had to keep it quiet. Like I even read that her friend told her not to mail it because it was illegal to mail anything having to do with homosexuality. So yeah, so she just passed this hand to hand, but it lasted. Like people saved it, and I thought that was really amazing. Yeah, it was really cool.
I guess I always thought about zines as like strictly kind of like 90s thing. I didn't know that there was such a long history. So like even going back to like the Harlem Renaissance, but then to see the word zine even in like like the 40s, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening. If you've made a zine, we would love to read it. You can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, that's HOSTS @gmail.com, or check out our website at handmadehistorypodcast.com. Bye.
Bye.
Can you say it's really cool again?
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.